Thank you for joining us. So I'll say a quick word about myself and then I'll turn it over to Kristi. My name is Kathryn Koerner and I serve as the SchoolWorks Director of School Design and Renewal. I have been with SchoolWorks for 13 years now, and I have been in this role for about 2 years. In this role, as it sounds like, I work across our service area, as we call it at SchoolWorks, helping founders design schools, get their applications together, help existing schools replicate, expand, as well as help schools through renewal. This is actually how I had the opportunity to become connected to Kristi way back in 2017. It's hard to believe so much time has elapsed, where I had the pleasure of working with Kristi and her leadership team, supporting them in their applications to start Compass Community Schools. Before I turn it over to Kristi to introduce herself, I also just wanted to say a quick word about SchoolWorks. We have a lot of folks who have joined us today, and I'm not sure that everyone is oriented to SchoolWorks. SchoolWorks is a national consulting company, and we work, like I said, nationally with an array of education organizations. So we work with fellows and founders, existing charter schools, traditional public schools, authorizers, state departments, and many more education organizations. And like I said, we do a lot of work around helping people found schools as well as renew their schools and expand and replicate their schools. But we also do a lot of school improvement work, where we work with existing charter and traditional public schools to support their improvement efforts. So we do all of that in support of improved student outcomes, which is the crux of SchoolWorks' mission. So with that, Kristi, I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself.
Oh, thanks so much, Catherine. I'm so glad to be here today and be with you again. It's been a while since we talked, but when we were writing the charters, I think you were my best friend. We spent so
Yeah.
much time together. So I'll introduce myself. My name is Kristi Baird. I am in Memphis, Tennessee. I've been in education for over 25 years now. And for the last 8 years, I have been with Compass Community Schools as the founder and executive director. So year one was our planning year, and then this is year 7 for us. And we are a network of 6 schools across neighborhoods in Memphis. And we have 5 elementary schools that serve K through 8, and then we have 1 high school that serves 9 through 12. And our elementary schools feed into that high school. So we offer a K-12 continuum.
Thank you, Kristi. And you kind of already went into my next kind of discussion point.
Mhm.
So before we dive into the meat of the discussion, which is obviously how you all as a network were able to bring down chronic absenteeism rates, I thought that you could just kind of further expound to just give an overview of your network for those who are unfamiliar. So you just touched on the number of schools, the grades you serve, but if you just want to talk us through some other key points around your schools like vision, mission model,
Yeah.
communities. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I love to. I'm going to start with our vision because this is like what the long-term goal of Compass Community Schools is. So our vision is inspired by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s statement, in education plus intelligence plus character. That's the true goal of education. And so what our aim is in Compass is to provide a true education provided within a safe, supportive, joyful, and hopeful school culture to prepare our students to be positive agents of change. And so, really, our vision is that we give our kids the academic and the character and moral uh, uh, development so that they can be agents of change in our community. That's how we came up with Compass. We wanted to instill this like compass within our kids to do right. And so one of the things that I love about our schools is our 3 pillars. And so our mission statement speaks to our 3 pillars. Our mission statement is we educate the whole child. And we do that through 3 pillars. So we have academic excellence, values-based character education, and service learning in the community. And so the service learning is unique to Compass. I know there are other schools that do service learning, but that's unique to Compass here in Memphis, because that's where our academic excellence and our character education kind of come together and go into action with service learning. So we have 21 different nonprofits that we partner with in the community. And all of our students from K through 12 go out into the community each quarter and participate in service with these different agencies. Like our K2 students work with nursing homes. Our 3-5 are really involved in like ecology and Clean Memphis. 6 through 8 look at food insecurity. They work with the Mid-South Food Bank. And then 9 through 12, our kids in ninth and 10th learn about like 21 different agencies. And then when they get into 11th and 12th, they have more choice. And so again, we have like, healthcare needs, elderly, we have food insecurity, social services, and we have ecology. So it's just really fun to see our kids take what they're learning in school and put that into action through service.
Thank you for that, Kristi. And it's like all coming back to me when we wrote
Yeah.
those applications. And I have to say that to your point around service learning, it really is the intersection that ties your academic model together. And so it's just wonderful to hear like that, it come to fruition and all the great efforts that your kids are doing. Um, Okay, so now that we're oriented to your network of schools, let's turn to the topic at hand, which is obviously chronic absenteeism. And so on this next slide here, we have kind of two snaps of data in the aggregate that's really across your network, as well as kind of an additional piece of context here, which is that your charters, your schools were launched as charters in school year 2019-2020, which is, of course, when everyone hears that, knows
Yeah.
that that is the year the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
So if you
One.
could kind of talk us through this data, how did this impact attendance across your schools?
Yeah, absolutely. If you don't mind, though, before I jump into this, I didn't mention, which was on the previous slide,
Oh,
about our demographics,
oh
which I
yeah.
would love to mention because I know I see from the chat we have people from all over the country and all different schools. So I want them to kind of be familiar with the demographics. So, like I said, we have 6 different schools. We have about 1,500 students. We have 400 in our high school, and our elementaries have about 200 to 250 apiece. And 71% of our students are Hispanic, 26% are African American, and the remaining 3% are white. 67% of our students have a home language other than English. So most of our students live in homes where the primary language is Spanish. And 77% of our kids come from zip codes with the lowest medium household income in our area. So the majority of our students are also would be considered low income or poverty.
Thank you for that context, Kristi. And of course, that like obviously bleeds into the next bullet point around your focus on equity to serve, these populations that are historically marginalized, like really, really well through your academic model.
Yeah. So yeah, and so I'll talk too about that in a little bit because we look at academics through an equity lens, and we also had to take that same lens when we looked at our attendance and chronic absenteeism. But I'll talk a little bit about like kind of our story as it relates to ADA and COS. Of course, ADA is average daily attendance, COS is chronically out of school. And so, like Kathryn said, the first year of Compass was 2019-20, and we were about to go on spring break, and we got the call from the district that we were going to close, and we naively thought we would close for 2 weeks and then come back. And of course, we closed for the rest of the year. But once we realized that it was going to be more of a long-term closure than a short-term, we distributed computers and laptops to all of our students. And it's funny when we go back and look at those pictures, like the first distribution, like I'm out there handing out laptops, and, and like no mask, no gloves, anything. And then the second one, like I've got a mask on and a face shield, just
Mhm.
like a
Mhm.
few
The
weeks difference,
evolution.
made such a difference as we learned more about COVID. But so we finished the 1920 school year remote. And then we started the 2021 school year with all of our students remote, but we were the first school in Shelby County, our LEA, to come back in person. And so we started returning in person in 2020 in September, right after Labor Day. And we started with K2, and then we built from there. And so by January, all of our schools were back in person, but we still had that option for at-home learning. And of course, just like all the other schools that are on here, we, did classes via Zoom, and it was just really challenging. But when we came back in the 21-22 school year, we required all students to be in person for in-person learning. And so that's when we really started to see a spike in our chronic absenteeism. And so you can see in the 21-22 school year, our chronic absenteeism got up to 49%.
Hmm.
And I will say we were really diligent about following CDC guidance for contact tracing. So if students were within 6 feet for 15 minutes or more of someone, they were they went remote for, I think it was 7 days at the time. And so that affected our chronic absenteeism too. But as we started getting back to normal, our chronic absenteeism was a lot higher than it had previously been or that we expected it to be. So in that the middle of the 21-22 school year, we did my academic team did step backs. And so our student services director really focused on chronic absenteeism. And we were just like, when we looked at the numbers on paper, we were like, oh my goodness, we've got to do something about this. So we started then in January of that school year meeting with families who were chronically absent. And so we saw some gains in attendance through that. And then in the 22-23 school year, we had an opportunity to join a cohort of schools. So one of our local foundations um, funded a cohort that several charters from Memphis were able to join, and it was with SchoolWorks. So a lot of the things I'm going to talk about today, we learned from SchoolWorks.
Attendance works.
Attendance works. I'm sorry. Your
Yeah.
school works. Attendance.
We're school
There's
works,
so
yes.
yeah. Y'all are
Yeah.
great too. Attendance works. School works. Thank you. So we learned from attendance works, and but what I love about the work that we've done is one, we did not have to add any additional staffing, so
Hmm.
it didn't add any cost to our budget, and two, the majority of things that we did are found free on their website. And they do offer partnerships, and our partnership was funded, of course, and with that came some in-person and virtual meetings and just an accountability partner. But I think any school can take what we've done and form an internal team and make the same efforts and see the same progress that we made at Compass.
Okay. All right. So let's talk more specifically about that team and the efforts. So obviously in your partnership that you talked about with Attendance Works, they helped you formulate a plan. And like you said, there's a wealth of resources that are on their website. We're looking at obviously a very familiar to folks in education, this intervention triangle, but this is specific to attendance. So if you could just talk us broadly through kind of the criteria for each of these tiers, and then we'll transition into the actual practical strategies that you implemented against each of these tiers.
Yeah. So when we look at this tiered system, and like Kathryn said, we use tiered systems for students at Compass. We even use them for teachers, but we use this tiered system to address attendance. And so it started with like foundational supports. What do we do for all students? And what is just like kind of like a typical practice and ubiquitous across our schools. And then we looked at tier one, like universal prevention. And so like communications with students and families that everyone gets. And then, and this I think is where we start to like equate the equity philosophy and the equity lens here. And so then we look at tier two and tier three. And so tier two is students missing anywhere between 10 to 19% of the days. And so at Compass, we go 185 days. So if they're missing about 18 days a year, they would they would fall in here. And then, of course, we have some students, and I'm sure many of the people on here do, of students who miss 20% or more. And so we have to provide more intensive interventions for the students who fall in that category. And like I said, I think often in the classroom we think about academics from the equity standpoint and not just giving everybody the same thing, but looking at the needs of students. And so here the same thing, looking at the needs of students and families, and where we might need to lean in as a school and provide more specific and targeted intervention and support.
Thank you for that. Okay, so here we have on this next graphic kind of the strategies that fall within each of those tiers that you just talked about. And so my next question is that if you could, now that we understand kind of the criteria and for students that fall within the various tiers, if you could talk through these actual practical strategies. Also, just want to, because I also went on Attendance Works website, just poking around, and they do have a lot of resources, including a template like this that schools can interact with. And so it's not pre-populated. So these strategies are really reflective of what you all decided that Compass Community Schools really need, right? Within each of
Yeah.
these tiers. It's not like a generic plan. This was responsive and specific to your network of schools. So if you
Yeah.
could talk us through what we're seeing on the screen.
Yeah, so I think in our first meeting with Attendance Works, we really focused on what's the difference in truancy and chronic absenteeism, because so many times schools are focused on truancy, those students who are absent with no excuse or no reason. And those are the ones that we tend to get we write letters about or refer or things like that. But really, when you look at your kids who have high absenteeism, most of them aren't truant. There's reasons they're absent. Their parents send an excuse or a letter, but they still fall into that chronically absent or chronically out of school. And so I think for us and for other schools, we had to kind of change our mindset of between truancy and chronically out of school, and also looking at it from a more like the carrot versus the stick, instead of having conversations with parents about like, well, if you're not here, we're going to refer you for truancy, or we're going to do this, or but like working and partnering with parents became more of our focus. And that's kind of how Compass was created, is to work with parents. So that philosophy really resonated well with us. And like you said, Kathryn, if you go on SchoolWorks, this is just a blank template. And it's got the tier one, two, and three at the side, and then the categories across the top. But everything that's filled in here is examples of what we did at Compass. And each school had their own individual plan, but I put this one together and sent it to you as just kind of an example of what it might look like. So foundational support, so things that we want to put into place that are just part of the culture of our school. And one thing is, I'll say two key strategies for us were culture and communication. Communicating with parents, but also developing this type of school culture where kids want to come to school. And so if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, it says support upon arrival and connection before content. So those are two phrases that we use at Compass. Supportive upon arrival just means like we are greeting the kids in the parking lot, at the door, at breakfast. Like we're happy to see them, and they know that when they come into the building. And then connection before content is a phrase that we use, and we apply it to our mornings with our students, but we also apply it to our meetings. So we do some type of connection activity before we jump into the work. And so at Compass, we use a responsive classroom model to do morning meetings and advisory with our middle and high school. And so those are some of the foundational supports. Another foundational support is just having communication structures in place, whether that's a back to school night, parent conferences, weekly newsletters, just different things to keep parents informed and engaged. And I think one of the most important things that we did that first year with Attendance Works was and this would be like a tier two strategy. We looked at our data from the year before, and we scheduled meetings with all of those families whose students fell into tier two and tier three. One, to let them know like how many days their child had missed the year before, because a lot of them, if you miss a day here and there, like
Mm-hmm.
they don't realize it, but those days add up. And so we brought that to the attention of the parents and just talked to them about how, it's important for their child to be here. Um, Also, seeing if they needed any supports, like was a child out because they didn't have proper uniforms, or they didn't come to school the first week because they didn't have supplies. If it's something like that, we wanted to address it before school even started. And then at the back to school nights, we talked about just the importance of attendance and the importance of also being at school on time and not being checked out early because those, even though they don't fall into chronically out of school, it still affects student learning.
Mhm.
I will say our most important tier one prevention strategy there on row two would be daily calls to families of students who are absent. So some schools use an automated call system, and the first year our high school used that automated system. We stopped using an automated system and we just started doing person-to-person calls. So if your child wasn't here by 8:15, you knew the school was going to call you. Because we wanted to encourage parents to get their kids there. So we might make a call at 8:15, say, "Oh, we're really Kathryn's not here today. We were concerned. Is everything all right?" And if they were like, "Oh, Kathryn's sick," then we'd be like, "Oh, hope she feels better. Do you want us to send her makeup work home?" But if a parent was like, "Oh, we got up late and an alarm didn't go off," we'd be like, "That's okay. Go ahead and bring Kathryn. We'd rather have her here late than not here at all." And so, one, it was positive communication, but also it was the parents also knew they were going to get that call
Right, from a
and
live human being.
from a live human being. And
Yeah.
I was talking to a dad one day, and he was coming. This is at our Compass Berkeley campus, so if they're on here, they'll laugh. He was like, "Can you ask Miss Wanda not to call me?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And she was like, "Whenever our kids are absent, Miss Wanda calls us." And I'm like, "Thank you so much for letting me know that. I'm going to let Miss Wanda know how much I appreciate her doing her job, you know,
Yeah.
because just that little call, like for one, helped some parents feel more connected. And for others, it kind of annoyed them and they didn't want Miss Wanda to call. So I'm going to get my kids to school so Miss Wanda won't call me. But we also had incentives for kids being at school. Every school does it a little bit different, and it's a great way for principals and counselors and teachers to get creative. And we also had, weekly guidance classes. We focus a lot on like academic supports. So students who might be missing because they're uncomfortable in classrooms because they're behind. We put in interventions and after school tutoring, summer camps. All of our kids, because of community eligibility in Memphis, have free breakfast and lunch. And then if you look at some of the tier two strategies, so this is kids who start to miss 10% to 19% of the days, we start to look at like why those kids or students are absent and try to figure out. And we did a plan, do, study, act cycle. Also, we
Hmm.
learned that through Attendance Works. And so we started to look at groups. For example, K was a group where we saw high attendance. And so we started talking to parents. And what we found out is some of our kindergarten parents, this was their first time their kid had gone to school. And so if their child had a runny nose, they would keep them homesick. And so we did some parent education about, okay, if your child has a fever or is throwing up, they need to stay home. If they just have a cold or a runny nose, like send them to school and we'll let you know if they get feeling worse, you know? And so just that was an example of the Plan, Do, Study, Act. Another example was in our high school. And I know we have some other high schools on here, so I don't know if you guys saw this or not, but we saw after COVID an increase in mental health concerns with our high schoolers. They were used to being at home, they were used to being isolated due to COVID. They're kind of grouchy and sleepy in the morning anyway. But just the social isolation and then getting back into group norms was hard for some of our students. And so this is an example of a tier three intervention, but we used our ESSER money to bring in a licensed clinical social worker and did small groups. And so we did some surveys with our students to see like, was it anxiety around being around people after COVID? or was it, just something else that was impacting them not wanting to come to school? And so we started doing small groups, and they have been so effective that even when the ESSER money ran out, we still uh, used our regular budget to provide that. So we still have that same licensed clinical social worker that we've contracted with to come in, and he does individual and small groups with our high schoolers. But you can see on tier three, when attendance um, is severely affected and they get into that 20% or more of days, we start to have more intense intervention, attendance contracts, check in, check out, like a student checking in, having an adult that they check in with a couple
Mm-hmm.
times a day. And individual student plans. What we found, especially with some of our middle school and high school students, that was who we needed to talk to more than the parent.
Interesting.
For an example, we had a middle school student at one of our K-8 schools, and she had a brother, and they walked to school. And so I think mom worked nights, so mom would be asleep in the morning. And so we worked with the older sister, like, you're in eighth grade. Like, what can we do to get you and your brother here? And we put some incentives in place for her getting her and her brother to school on time and every day. And we had positive results for that. So again, just like through this equity lens of like looking at groups and looking at individuals to determine what the root cause analysis is, and then whether it's a group thing we can address or if it's an individual student issue that we can address. That was the direction we went.
Yeah, and all responsive to your specific students' needs. Um, okay, so thank you for taking us through. I know there's a lot more detail that you could share through this chart, but in the interest of time, so let's kind of talk about, so now we understand the tiers, the things within the tiers. How did you do it, right? So how did you actually implement, operationalize the attendance plans across your network of schools?
Yeah. So at Compass, I read a book several years ago, Measure What Matters. And so I really love this system of objectives and key results. And so it's just really a clean and easy way to set goals and key results. And then is that reflected in your calendar? So, like, as a school leader, what's the most important pieces of your work? And if we look at our day as school leaders, sometimes like the things that take most of our time are not the priorities on our goal
Hmm.
list.
Yep.
And so this system of OKRs and matching this to our calendar helped us to set goals, look at key results, and then manage our time to meet those results. And so I do bi-monthly check-ins, or not bi-monthly, bi-weekly check-ins with all my principals. And in those check-ins, we visit classrooms, talk about, we do teacher planning, things like that. But one of the things we do is we also look at our OKRs. And so, looking at the attendance data in our OKRs and the strategies that we're doing that are working or not working is one way that we help to plan and measure um, our performance. But again, being a school, it's also looking at your data regularly. And so the school level teams look at their attendance data each week in an attendance meeting. And so the school level teams include the principal, um, the school counselor, and an office member, usually the school secretary or the ops manager.
Thank you for that. And I also, so, and next we're going to talk about the impact of the work. But I'm so grateful to you. I'm putting this book on my radar because it's now on my to read list. And I did like just a cursory kind of preview of the book in preparation for the webinar when you highlighted it. And something really resonated with me that I thought would be worth sharing, which is that this book wasn't written for the education sector, right? Like this book was written by a venture capitalist who way back many moons ago had early investment in Google and Amazon, and found that the leaders, the founders of these now Fortune 500 companies, um, had great vision, had brilliance, but had no way to operationalize it. And
Mhm.
so wrote this book anchored in what you talked about, the objectives and key results, as a way to ground those founders to be able to realize their vision. And of course they have because they're
Yeah. Yeah.
Google, Amazon, whatnot. And so that just so resonated with me that whether you're, a huge company on the Fortune 500 list, a network of six schools in Memphis trying to, reduce
Yeah.
chronic absenteeism rates, whatever, like these principles drive achievement of goals and results.
Yeah.
So I'm really looking forward to hopefully reading it over,
I and
the winter
I
holidays.
I also highly suggest, and I could be, I'm about 90% sure what I'm going to say is true because it's been a while since I read it, but I would encourage you to listen to it on Audible because I think this is the one, I'm pretty sure different chapters are read by different people. And so, like, you might have someone from Google reading one chapter. You
Oh,
have
okay.
Bono
Amazing.
reading another chapter because Bono's talking about how he used this in his nonprofit. So it's
Oh,
really
interesting.
interesting to hear different chapters read by different people who actually used this system and saw results from it.
Thank you. Thank you for
So,
that, Kristi.
yeah. So,
Okay, so before this conversation is going fast, so before we kind of turn it over to a Q&A session for attendees, let's talk about the impact of all this work, right? So we kind of understand the tiers, what you did within the tiers, how you operationalized it, and let's talk about the impact of the work across your network. So the previous data slides we saw were more at the aggregate level of just across your network, those attendance rates. Here we can see the results of your individual schools. And so overall, and then we have, of course, the list of your six individual schools with the top showing average daily attendance, longitudinal data, and then the bottom showing those chronically out of school rates. And of course, in last school year, 24-25, we can see that three schools are highlighted. I mean, especially if you look at Berkeley, I mean, what a success story. 55% in 2020, 21, 22, going down to 0.4% last year.
yeah.
We can also obviously see some variance in results. So if you could just talk us through this impact that we're seeing in this data and then kind of, causes for the variance from your perspective as the top leader of the network.
Yeah, like I said, all of our schools participated in the attendance works cohort, and all of them took the strategies and made plans. And I think it's like anything else. What gets our attention and what we set up a plan for and work that plan and monitor that plan, we see success. And so you see all of our schools after the first year of working with Attendance Works saw gains. Um, and 5 out of 6 of our schools continued to see like reductions in chronically out of school each year. Fraser saw reductions from 45% to 24%, but then it went back up a little bit, but this year it's back down. And so, my advice would be just like anything else that you set a goal around, like set your goal, what are your strategies, and then work your plan, but also monitor your plan. And so the benefit of working was with Attendance Works was that we kind of had this accountability structure in place with an Attendance Works person. But our schools that were the most successful, which were Berkeley, Binghamton, and Hickory Hill, were consistent about meeting weekly and consistently following their plans. The other three we saw improvements, of course. Fraser 52% to 26.5, Orange Mountain 51% to 20%. I mean, great improvements, but we didn't see as big of improvements compared to those who really had someone at that campus that really took that and owned it. And it was not the
Mm-hmm.
principal, it was usually this guidance counselor or someone in the school office. But they took the plan, they worked the plan, they would revise, discuss it each week, and we really saw the gains. And then at Berkeley, you see we went down to 0.4%, which was one student who had uh their COS was 11%. So like they were almost at like zero kids. And so I will also add that we saw correlations to academics with this. So, for
Mhm.
example, Compass Berkeley had the highest academic growth. In Tennessee, we have what's called an AMO target, like this, the state sets a goal for growth, and we hit double AMO there in math, science, social studies, and we're 1 point away from AMO in ELA. So, and same thing, Berkeley and Hickory Hill and Fraser were designated as reward schools last year. And we had 4 out of 5 of our schools were level 5 schools in Tennessee, which is the highest rating you can get for growth. So they're definitely, I mean, we knew it, but we also saw it in the data that there's this correlation between kids being at school and student learning.
Yeah, of course. And of course, it's so common sense, but of course, then the data
Mhm.
substantiates that. Um, in terms of ownership of the plan, that also just so resonates. And then that kind of loops into, Kristi, something that you and I had talked about just in preparation of this webinar, which was like buy-in, right? And
Mhm.
so I think that you had shared that these 3 schools that were so successful in reduction really truly had buy-in across the school from all levels of stakeholders. And so that point resonated with me so strongly when I'm thinking about, as I shared, SchoolWorks engages in school improvement efforts, not necessarily anchored in attendance, but any type of improvement. And so we often start that work by going to the school and kind of diagnosing areas of need, areas of strength. And oftentimes when we ask about improvement goals, leadership might be able to speak to it with specificity. But then when you're asking others, supporting leaders, teachers, other staff, a lot of times they can't speak to a goal with specificity. They might know, like, oh, we're trying to improve math scores or, whatever it might be. So they can't speak to it with specificity, which means they don't know their role in that goal, right? Which so speaks to the buy-in that you had shared, where it was like everyone knew the goal. Everyone knew we were working towards this and everyone knew their role in like achieving it, which I just feel like is so important to highlight in terms of um, operationalizing this work. And it just shows in this data. I mean, especially like you said with Berkeley. So, um,
Yeah.
what a success
And
story. Yeah.
that data is visible in the school. So when you go to Berkeley, they have outside the office, they have a daily data board of attendance and a recap of like the top 3 classes from last week. When you go to Compass Hickory Hill, outside each classroom door is their ADA for that day and also their iReady scores for the day before. And then if you go to Fraser, you'll see a pair of bedazzled jeans hanging by a class, and it's the Smarty Pants. Um, so the class that had the highest ADA for the week prior. So just like making it fun and making it like not punitive at all, but more
Mhm.
celebratory. Those have been really fruitful, but also have helped our adult culture to really buy in.
Great. Thank you for that. Okay, so as we are coming up on time here, and I do see that we have a question or two in the chat that I want to get to. But the full results of the poll are now in. And like I said, we have a number of charter network leaders, charter school leaders. We also have an array of district leaders as well as traditional district school leaders and district teachers. So like I said, we have a lot of stakeholders, an array of schools that are serving kids. And so I thought we could end our session with some key learnings and takeaways that you wanted to share. And then we have on this slide actually a quote, Kristi, that you shared with us in preparation for the webinar. So I thought you could just kind of highlight that and then punctuate anything else that you thought that would be really important for folks who are engaging in this work to know.
Yeah, and so like I said, I think working to reduce chronic absenteeism is just like any other work in education. When the need is identified, a plan is made with strategy and care, and it's followed up with fidelity, you'll see improvement. And so that's what we have seen in at least 3 of our schools prior. And so for those three schools, we still keep it as a focus, and it's become a part of the culture of that school. Like the kids just know, like, oh, I need to be here. I need to be on time. Attendance is important. And for the other three schools where we saw some gains, but not as strong a gains, this year we've really leveled up just attention to our plan and is it being followed with fidelity and consistency.
Thank you for that. Okay, so a couple questions here in our final moments, and then I'll just have, before we do that, I do want to note, because these were actually a couple of questions that were in the chat. We will share this recording and this PowerPoint so that you all can reference it, and then we've also embedded the link to Attendance Works just for easy reference.
Yeah. And
So,
I'll add real quick, Catherine,
sure.
like I specifically shared my chart. A lot of schools are like, oh, I don't want to share, but I'm the philosophy, your kids are my kids are your kids. The more we share, the more our community benefits. So feel free to take the work that we've done and use it if it's helpful to you.
Thank you, Kristi. I'm sure everyone on this Zoom appreciates that sentiment. Okay, so a question here. We are kind of in our final moments here, but there is a question where it says, in your experience, what is the ideal staff to student ratio for achieving the best outcomes? And specifically, how many staff members should be dedicated to monitoring attendance relative to the total student population? This person is asking because they're thinking when this responsibility falls to a single department or individual, it can become overwhelming.
Yeah.
Great
I will
question.
say the thing about Compass is our schools are small. Our elementaries are 2 to 250, our high schools around 400. And we have 20 to 28 students in a class with one teacher. Our kindergarten does have an assistant, but our other classes are just, one teacher for 20 to 25, 25 to 28 students. And so I think like our size has been a benefit because that three-person team was really able to take that work and run with it. So if you had a larger school, then you might need like grade band leads, like a K2 lead or a 3-5 lead or a ninth grade lead or something like that. But I think here, more importantly, is making sure you have the right people who are really passionate about it and have connections with the children and the families to be, is key. And you heard the majority of our parents speak Spanish, so it was important for us to have a staff member who spoke Spanish calling those families. So I think it can definitely be customized to the size of your school.
And one final question here as we are just coming up on time. A participant wants to know, are there sample incentives on Attendance Works website and specifically for high school?
I don't know. There might be. You can check and see. We find our high schoolers are really incentivized by concessions. So we've started a Friday concession
Hmm.
stand. We are also in the process of adding in like a coffee bar for Fridays.
Oh,
And we use Jeans Day passes or out of uniform passes, things like that. So those are some of the just like low hanging fruit incentives that we use with high schoolers.
okay. Thank you so much, Kristi. Well, we are at time. Before I officially close this out, I did want to highlight that SchoolWorks does have a grant program. It's called the SchoolWorks Changemakers Grant. And so what this is, it's a $5,000 award to a team of educators seeking to advance student learning through an impact-focused initiative. And so any public school or district is eligible. We have a cycle open right now. And like I said, we'll send out this PowerPoint to the email that you registered. And so the link will be embedded to the grant application. So if there's something that you're looking to get funded, maybe some work around attendance, you can apply to the grant. And Kim Perone, who is the owner and president of SchoolWorks, actually personally selects the grant awardees. I also want to note that it's a one-time award, but we open the cycle every quarter. So if you aren't prepared to submit your application by this submission date, the cycle will open afterwards. So like I said, if you're looking for some funding, be sure to check out the grant. So with that, Kristi, this time has gone so fast, but thank you so much for joining us and just sharing all of this information. I know that everyone who is here today has taken something away, and just thank you again for carving out the time to share your expertise and your experience.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I've really enjoyed it. And I know we have quite a few Memphis school leaders who are on here. So if you have questions that you wanted to ask that you didn't get to, you've got my email. If you're here in Memphis, I'm on all the charter, all those common emails we get together. So reach out. I'd be happy to help.
Thanks, Kristi.
Thanks, Kathryn.